Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, we are back talking about Australian Survivor, Blood versus Water, and here I will be doing my mid-season power ranking for the season. Now, like previous seasons of the show, I'll be ranking every player left in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win this season. Now, this won't only be based around the gameplay of the season and where these people are currently positioned, but actually more so based around the edit of the show and who I think is likely from that aspect of it. Which with Australian Survivor and how they edit their show, I mean, there's not that many people that can win. But we'll talk about it anyway. But before we get to that, I also want to talk about my thoughts on the season. Now that we're at the halfway point in the season, 12 episodes in, we're about to merge. And also, I'll talk about all the people that have been voted out so far. So let's talk about the season. And I am just very whelmed with this season. I will say that I do think the season started off pretty strong. I think the first week was pretty good. I think the premiere was very interesting to see. Obviously Sandra back, and then Mark and Sam and Andy eventually getting the boot there. The downfall of Brianna was fun. The Juicy Dave tribal with him blowing up his game was incredible. Again, that first week was very strong. I'll say that since then, my opinion of the season has continued to wane as time went on, as I really just don't find this season that entertaining. I think part of that has to do with the cast. Again, like, we just don't know the majority of these people. I really only like half these people have gotten consistent screen time in at least like half of the episodes. And again, like, I just don't really like this cast that much. I mean, obviously there are these notable characters like Chrissy and I guess Khan, I guess Jordy. I mean, we have people that are playing the game pretty well, like Sam, Mark, and Jesse. For the most part, this cast is not that interesting to me, and that was my worry coming into the season. Again, I always worried with Blood versus Water seasons where certain people are cast more so for their dynamics than them as actually entertaining reality television figures, and I feel like we are kind of seeing that in actuality here with the likes of Michelle and Mel and Josh and Jordan, even Juicy Dave, who's become invisible. Like, I really feel like a lot of this cast is just kind of to me. Where, like, even again, like, Sam and Mark are great players, but even then, they're not the most riveting TV. And also with, like, so much of the screen time early on being focused around Sandra and her going home, and Nina to go along with that a few episodes later, like, it really just leaves this massive gap in the season to me of who's actually the main source of intrigue on this season. Also, I feel like the editing has been very blatant for a lot of the season. Now, there were a couple votes here and there that did surprise me. The Kate vote did surprise me. I'll be honest, like, I did not expect Amy to go home in her boot episode, but everything else has been so foreshadowed to me that that has also played a factor. I think some of that is chalked up to Australian Survivor's editing, which has no level of subtlety, which we will get to when I get to my power rankings. So again, as a whole, the season so far, I've just been very on it, but again, I am interested in these dynamics moving forward to where I do expect some interesting gameplay after the merge. And with that, now let's talk about the individual players themselves. Again, we'll talk about the people that have been booted so far, talk about them in boot order, and then eventually get to the power ranking itself. So first, let's talk about the first boot in Andy, who, again, to me, was a strange casting choice coming into it. Again, I liked Andy on his original season, but again, it felt very weird. They was just randomly coming back for a Blood versus Water season, especially when his loved one wasn't anyone that was super notable either. And I mean, like, Andy obviously comes into this with a bad reputation, obviously coming off as like a snake his first time around, and that obviously did seem to harm him this time. And I do really feel for Andy. Again, Andy is a massive fan of the show, and to see him now have two bad runs on the show, again, you gotta feel for the guy. So I was disappointed to see him go first, though. Again, like, I felt like the editing was so blatant on that literally by like the 3-minute mark in the episode, I was already expecting Andy to go home. But I'll probably talk about that more so in my review at the end of the season. Next up, we got Brianna, who I really liked as a early boot figure here as well. Had a really fun downfall. I mean, coming into it, I very much expected her to be in this like Chelsea Walker-esque mold of this player that has a lot of potential, but then kind of gets screwed over in the game, whether that be due to misperceptions of them or being swapped into a bad position. But no, Brianna just isn't that good at the game, and we see her play so aggressively and so blatantly aggressively in her first few days here that does make her a very clear target. but also did make for some good TV. Next up, we got Kate, who, again, as I said, I was surprised that Kate went home. I think her vote was probably the highlight of the season so far. But, I mean, her run went as expected. Again, I was expecting her to be like the Janelle from Brains vs. Brawn, of her not really fitting in for Tribe, being the first boot. And we did see that, though. I mean, again, to be fair, gets Isla out of the game. Though, to be fair, also, she would have been voted out had Juicy Dave not blown himself up at Tribal. But either way, I have nothing against Kate. She seems like a lovely person. But in terms of her potential on Australian Survivor, again, not surprised she went home this early. Next up, we have Alex. And, I mean, we got nothing to say here. I mean, he was barely on the show. The only time he was on the show was talking about his back. Obviously, he ends up quitting. Again, it's a shame. Sucks to see someone go out that way with a back injury there. But again, was invisible on the show. Didn't even mention that he was the brother of Sam Frost, which was like the main reason he was cast to begin with. So again, not much to say there. Next up, we got Jay Bruto, who is only the second person in the history of English language Survivor to get 0 confessionals at the time that they're voted out. And I mean, again, he was there. It's not like he was like completely invisible from the show, because he does get to talk at challenges about Alex's back injury and stuff, but it's like, I mean, again, he was barely there. Not important to the show. Had what could have been a really fun blind side had the edit not been so blatant about it, and me not fully expecting Australian Survivor to completely purple him in the edit by the time he went home. But again, he got no content on the show. He was there. Next up, we got Sandra, and I'll say, again, Sandra played well concerning the circumstances she was given. I will say that as a whole, doesn't really change my opinion of her as a player. I think really it's more of the same. To be honest, this trajectory was very similar to her Game Changers run, specifically in the fact that she was able to get allegiances on her original tribe. That kept her safe initially. Did play actively, not as controlling as she was on Game Changers, where she seemed to have full control over her original and swap tribe, only to get screwed over by the second swap. Here, again, she seemed to be more in the background. It seemed to play more similarly to how she would play in like Heroes vs. Villains or Pearl Islands, but still had a similar trajectory to Game Changers of her being taken out immediately after the swap. And again, I think that's pretty much the trajectory of Sandra on almost any given season at this point, considering how big of a target she has on her back coming into it, which technically keeps her safe very early on because her target is so big that people are going to want to keep her around as a potential shield. But once they end up swapping, and again, Sandra's gotten bad swaps to where she's not with the people that she was originally with, when she's with the new group of people, they have no incentive to keep her around as a shield at that point, because instead she's going to be a shield for the other people that she was already a shield for. So again, I mean, like, this was the expected trajectory for Sandra. I did think there was a chance she was going to make the merge, and if she had done so, it would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. But once she got a bad swap here, it was pretty apt for her to go there. Next up, we got Sophie, who I thought was a fun villain for the show from a TV standpoint. Obviously, outside the game, very questionable things going on with Sophie. However, in the course of the show, I thought she was a fun villain, was a fun foil to Sam and Mark, who are clearly being propped up at this point as like the show's heroes. And funny to see her get voted out twice by Sam over the course of the same season. And to me, is actually probably one of the better characters that were booted in the pre-merge here. Next up, we got Amy, and Amy's an interesting one. I think Amy's a player that does have a level of potential. I think Amy turned out to be pretty much what I was expecting Brianna to be in the preseason, of this more like Chelsea Walker, Allie Elliott mold of a person that's booted in the mid to late pre-merge, but someone that demonstrates some ability in the game. And again, I think Amy obviously found an idol, was the one that put the original Sophie boot into motion. So again, like, I think Amy is a player that has a lot of potential, though I will say that I do think her actual boot episode was a pretty bad one for her. I do think she plays that round in particular pretty poorly, but again, at the end of the day, I still wouldn't be opposed to seeing her back, and I think she would be fun on a return. Next up, we got Nina, and obviously Nina's a big one here, and I think Nina played very well, obviously, to the point where, like, I think Nina might be a better version of Sandra. And like, while we didn't actually get to see that fully play out, I will say that I was more impressed with Nina on this season than I have been with Sandra on any of her individual seasons. That being said, again, she was obviously medevaced, and we'll never really see how this season would have played out. That, and also, I do think the edit probably overhyped her a little bit in terms of her positioning on the tribe, where there are points I noticed where like people are outlining like who's in the majority alliance and they don't actually mention Nina, yet whenever we see Nina, she's mentioned as being part of the majority alliance. Also, I do think there are moments on the show that are clearly there to prop her up in situations where, like, I don't know how important they really were, specifically in her telling the guys to go after Mel instead of Shay, which didn't seem like it was anything, yet the show really tried to prop her up for it. Also, the Andy boot is another one where, like, I think she plays that round very well, but, like, I don't know how integral she really was to executing that plan, considering it looked like Mark was already on board with that plan beforehand. And I just feel like there's a lot of like question marks on how much control she really had on the tribe. But I do see, again, so much potential in Nina, and considering how clear production seemed to make it that they would want her to return to Australian Survivor, I would be very surprised if we don't eventually see her back. Next up, we got Croc, and Croc was a surprise to me. I will say that while obviously by the time he got booted, it was obvious he was going home, I didn't think that Croc was on his way out from before the episode, where, yeah, I did think that, okay, maybe there could be some danger at this point, specifically how much talk there is about taking his idol to the merge, and how we did see him start to disagree with how the majority group wanted to proceed, and obviously that could have led to some danger. But again, I didn't expect him to go home this early. I really thought he would be like an early merge boot. And really, as a whole, like, I was kind of underwhelmed by Croc on this season. Again, coming into it, I was very much expecting him to be this, like, Matt Rogers type of this person that is a dominating figure and this strategically active player, but one that, again, falls short in the early merge. And yeah, we see that in his last round where he does try to put together this vote to blindside Jesse, but seemed to completely fail at that, where no one was on board with it. So again, I was underwhelmed by Croc on this season, but again, wasn't expecting him to go home at this point. And then finally, we got Ben, who, I mean, I was expecting him to go home throughout this week. Ben seems like a pretty mediocre player, if I'm being honest. It really seems like a lot of the things that kept him in the game as long as he did was his physical strength, where outside of that, he was rarely within the majority group, and Ozzy getting voted out beforehand, and then Croc reaches out to him to give him a lifeline. He just ends up turning on Croc, only for the people that he turned on Croc for to flip against him immediately afterwards. So again, I thought that was all pretty poor play on Ben's end. But even if he didn't go home here, he's someone that I think would have been primed to be booted in the next few episodes anyway. But there we go. I mean, those are my thoughts on all of the boots so far. So now let's get into the power ranking. Again, we have 13 people to rank here. And again, we will be ranking them based on how likely I feel like it is that they are going to win this season. So let's start off at number 13. We have the only person who has literally been invisible the entire season, and that is Mel, who, again, who is Mel? Like, we've gotten to this point, 12 episodes into the season where she has 0 confessionals. She's literally never spoken directly to the camera across the entire season so far. It is insane that this is the case. I mean, this has never happened before in the history of Survivor, where a person is this purple this late into the season. And what makes this even more damning is this last episode where she gets voted out and wins a fire-making challenge against Ben and still gets no content across that entire episode. And what's even more bizarre about this is the fact that Mel and Michelle were one of the more advertised people in the preseason. They got a preseason video talking about their relationship, yet they've just not been on their show. And it is so bizarre to me how they're portrayed here. Now, I will say that, like, from what we've seen, it doesn't seem like Mel is that interesting of TV anyway. But again, it's still ridiculous that she's gotten literally no content across this entire season. Again, obviously has no chance of winning this season. Now, I would not be surprised if all of a sudden she does get a massive availability spike after the merge. And I think there's definitely a chance that she could make a deep run on the season. It's just that she's not winning. Like, they're not going to give their winner 0 confessionals over the course of the first half of the season. So again, Mel very clearly at the bottom here at 13. Now, number 12 might not be the person that you would expect considering the last pick, but at number 12, we do have David, also known as Juicy Dave, who I just love that JLP is calling him Juicy on the show now. But David is such a weird figure because, like, he is one that obviously got 0 confessionals for the first 2 episodes. However, episode 3 gets a ridiculous amount of content. Pretty much all of episode 3 is based around him. He finds out Brianna gets voted out. He goes on the reward, which he plays terribly, and having a very awkward relationship with Khan. He blows up his game at Tribal that causes him to almost be voted out. Like, all of that is insane. And to be honest, at that point, that's actually probably the point that was the highest on him in terms of winning chances, as at least he's gotten content. At least he's on the show. And then the episode immediately afterwards where Sophie goes home, again, he gets content again, once again talking about his blow up in the previous episode. But since then, he has gotten no content. He has gotten 0 confessionals outside that point, which again, very much makes it seem like he is only getting content when he is absolutely necessary to be on the show. Again, it was those 2 rounds, the round where he blows up his game and the round where he tries to recover from blowing up his game. Those are the only 2 episodes where he gets any semblance of content. Every single time afterwards, it is people talking about him, including him in groups, but like he's not getting any say himself. Again, we see him being part of this Amy, Jay, David trio, but we get no talk from David himself about that grouping. We now see that he's in this boys group with Jordy, Mark, Jordan, and Josh, but again, no content about his relationship to them. We see during the Amy blind side, where again, he is very close to Amy, supposedly, according to the edit, according to Amy, yet we know nothing about how he interprets that vote, where he just goes along with the split vote and allows Amy to go home. We get nothing from him. Again, he is a person on this show that is simply not important to the season. Like, he's only being shown at the very instances that he is important. And again, for a winner, that is not how they would portray a winner. So considering David is just not there, he's not winning the season, and also the fact that he has no real storyline for a potential win either. He has no real connective tissue to many other people on the show. Again, he's simply just there. So because of that, he's here at number 12. Now number 11, similar thing, that this person's gotten a bit more content, and that person is Jordan. Again, Jordan is someone that has gotten content more recently, specifically after he joined up with Josh, to where he did get a lot of content in the Amy Boot episode with him being like the secondary target there. He did get some content on his original tribe, particularly around his relationship with Amy and him being part of Sophie's initial alliance. But like outside of that, I mean, he's really gotten very little content across the season. And whenever he is shown, it's more so for negative things. Again, he is shown when Sophie is upset at him for siding with the enemy. He's shown when he's leaking information to Amy that could potentially backfire on him. We see him defend Amy in Amy's boot episode, only for Amy to try to blindside him. And he also loses the challenge for his tribe. Again, another really bad look. Again, he's gotten more content, but it's all pretty negative. And again, just doesn't really have a solid storyline on the season to give him any real chance of potentially winning. Though, I mean, in reality, the bottom half of this list all have literally 0% chance of winning the game. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where he's placed. But again, I do feel like his edit has no real semblance of positivity to it outside of his connection with Josh. So because that, he is here number 11. Now number 10, we're getting to the person that you probably would have thought would have been right next to her loved one, but she's a bit higher. And here at number 10, we have Michelle. Now again, Michelle has gotten one confessional over the course of 12 episodes. However, the one saving grace that makes her higher than David and Jordan is the fact that her one confessional is actually a solid one. It's one that, if it was in episode 1, I think it would have made me think that Mel was a top contender after the premiere. But again, it was in episode 6? So obviously it's not much to put much credence into, but I mean, it's something which I don't have with anyone else. And again, that confessional is her talking about being under the tutelage of Sandra and her learning from Sandra about how to play the game, which again, at least gives her a storyline. Maybe she's the one to continue on the Sandra storyline now that Sandra and Nina are gone. But I mean, come on. In reality, Michelle's not winning this game either. It's just that, again, to me, that's at least a semblance of a storyline, which is more than the previous people we've talked about. She's here at number 10. Now, number 9, we are moving on to, again, another person mostly invisible on the show, but unlike the previous people we talked about, at least had one episode that's largely revolved around him that wasn't as negative as David's, and that is Josh. Now again, Josh has been invisible on the show. He's only gotten 2 episodes with confessionals, with one of those being the premiere, which I believe was a voiceover more so than an actual confessional. But he at least had that one episode. Again, the Amy Boot episode was an episode that largely revolved around Josh, with them setting up that he is the leader of his group. He got a solid intro. He seemed to be set up there as a person that will be a big figure later in the game. That being said, though, it is strange that he was completely invisible again after that episode. In the last 3 episodes from this week, he got no content across those 3, which is also a very bad sign. But again, none of these people are winning. It doesn't matter. To me, again, like at least that one episode was pretty strong from his end. Again, if that had been an earlier episode of the season, I think he would be a serious contender. But again, it was episode 9. But, I mean, to be fair, I mean, like Benji, who is someone that notably had 0 confessionals until episode 7. And from that point on, he became the top confessional getter of the season, which is just insane. And to be honest, I was kind of expecting that from Josh at the point of episode 9. But again, now that he's been invisible again, probably not even looking in that direction. But I actually still, like, I think Josh is probably in it for the long haul. Like, I would be pretty surprised if Josh could probably be a boot in this next coming week, like a very early merge boot, but if he's not, like, I think he's probably an end gamer. Like, that's probably why they took the time to even introduce him when they did. But again, like, he's not winning the season. I think if he was winning the season, they would have propped him up a lot more. I mean, he's still not winning, still at number 9. Now number 8, and now we're at least getting the people that have a semblance of a chance of winning in my eyes. But again, I still don't think these bottom people are winning. But here at number 8, we do have Khan. And Khan is interesting to me, again, largely because like his edit is one that is very inconsistent. And it is one that I do feel like he is, again, once again, only being shown when he is absolutely necessary to the season, specifically in episodes where his idol is of great importance to the episode. And considering how dynamic of a character Khan seems to be, again, he is a very fun presence on the show. I would have expected him to get a lot more content than what he's currently getting. And he does get a pretty big opening to the season, where in episodes 2 and 3, he gets a decent amount of content there. Again, he seems to be in this position of being the backup target in many situations due to people trying to flush his idol out. But again, like, that feels like most of his storyline on the season. I also feel like it's a knock for me that Amy got voted out in a position where, like, again, Khan was very clearly emotional after Amy was voted out. Yeah, I feel like they kind of just brush it under the rug a bit. Like, yes, obviously they show him getting emotional immediately afterwards, but I feel like if Khan was getting a true winner's edit, they would really be focusing on how now Amy is gone and how he's going to get revenge for her and how he's going to win the game for her, which, again, we just get nothing close to that. And again, like, to me, I think Khan is clearly a big character. I think he is someone that the show wants to promote as this big character, but I also feel like it's very clear that he is not winning this season at this point, where even before this last week here, I would have actually had him a few spots higher, but I think the more and more time goes on, specifically post-swap, I do feel like his edit is just disintegrating more and more and more to where he is someone that I just don't expect to end up winning the season, especially when we still have plot threads from Mark earlier on about him targeting Khan. And I feel like that could probably come to roost after the merge here. So again, while Khan is a big figure on the season, I just don't think he's winning the game. He is here number 8. Now number 7, we're moving on to a player that I was very high on in the first week of the show. Looking at my power rankings from the first week, I had it at number 3 after the premiere, number 1 after episode 2, and then number 2 after episode 3. But again, another one that as time goes on, her edit is just disintegrating more and more and more, and that person is Shay. And again, Shay I thought had a pretty solid premiere week. I think her premiere in particular was pretty strong, with her instantly coming off as a pretty strong player, and one that did get some highlighted relationships there. Episode 2, it felt like they were trying to shield her from the Brianna situation, where Brianna gets all the brunt of the negativity there, while Shay is shown in a better light. But again, like, I feel like beyond that, her edit has just significantly waned. To where something that I notice is that there is a decent amount of talk across season about the Shay and Ben relationship. However, whenever that relationship is brought up until like the last couple episodes, it was always from Ben's perspective. Ben was the one talking about their relationship, not Shay. Again, it's not until Ben gets voted out that Shay even mentions her relationship with Ben on their show. And again, I feel like if this was the winner, they would really be talking about Shay and her relationship with her loved one out there, which they're just simply not. Now, I will say that I am interested in Shay's trajectory in the season. Like, obviously right now she seems to be in a pretty bad spot to where she seems like a pretty easy person to pick off after the merge. However, I think her edit is kind of reminding me a bit of Flick's from last season, where again, Flick is another one that had a very strong first couple weeks. But then immediately afterwards, her edit disintegrates as time goes on to the point where she becomes this like rootable underdog figure by the time of the merge. And at that point becomes a clear person that's going to make a very deep run, but not end up winning the game. I kind of see that trajectory for Shay here, where again, if she's not one of the first few boots after the merge, I think she'll probably be one of these people that gets like third, fourth place and ends up coming up short. Again, similar to that of a Flick or a Brooke. But obviously the commonality there is the fact that they don't win. And I don't expect Shay to win this season at this point, though I can see a semblance of a story there for her, especially if she gets a lot of content around Ben in the next coming episode. But again, I still don't see it truly coming together for her. So she's here at number 7. Now number 6, we're moving on to someone whose edit that I feel like is very tough to read. I mean, like, I think it's kind of easy to read in the sense that I don't think that they're winning, but I can see kernels of a winner's edit there for this person. But at number 6, we do have Jesse. Now, Jesse is someone that, I think got a pretty solid premiere. Again, he instantly gets to talk about his status on the tribe. He gets this content about him being perceived as a kid and him using that to his advantage. He obviously, in this last week, gets really propped up through him orchestrating the Ben blind side and then the Croc blind side. But really, again, I feel like if he was the winner, these moments would not be as isolated as what they are. Again, like, it very much feels like, again, like he is being shown when it's important. Again, he was an important figure during the Ben blindside. Again, I think probably it's shared credit between him and Sam, but Sam has already gotten a lot of the credit before that. So they decided to give it all to Jesse here. And also it plays into a better storyline in the next episode where Ben tries to save Jesse, which just further diminishes Ben's edit, but also making for a fun storyline there. I think that's probably why Jesse gets as much content as he does in the Ben Boot episode, which is actually, by the way, ridiculous that he only had 4 confessionals coming into that episode and comes out of it with 21, which is dumb. But again, that's Australian Survivor for you. And again, like, really Jesse is this high, mainly because there is a semblance of a winner edit that can be taken from his premiere. And typically with Australian Survivor, and really, I mean, just Survivor Edgic in general, the premiere is typically very important, but in Australian Survivor in particular, there's never been a point where someone has won the game after never getting a semblance of a storyline after the premiere. And with Jesse at least getting that storyline set up there, that is enough for me to land him here at number 6 here. Now number 5, we're moving on to another one that is very tough for me to read. I actually keep on going back and forth between Jesse and this person. And I do think this last episode gave this person the edge, but again, it's very close. At number 5, we do have Jordy. And Jordy's edit is a bit less impressive as a whole to me than Jesse's. Again, Jesse, I think had a great premiere. Jordy had like a fine premiere. He did get a confessional, but it didn't really feel like it was setting up a storyline in the way that Jesse was. That does make me very much question Jordy just as a whole. And also, like, he did have a very quiet edit for the next few episodes afterwards, only for him to really skyrocket in terms of content during the Sandra boot, and him in particular getting a lot of the credit for the Sandra boot. But that kind of leads into what I interpret his edit to be. And I think Jordy is going to be a big player on the season. I think they are propping him up as a massive player, but again, not necessarily the winner. As I talked earlier with Benji, where I talked about with Josh, I thought Josh could be getting the Benji edit. Doesn't seem like that's the case at this point. I think that's what Jordy is at this point. I think Jordy is more so getting the Benji edit of this person that has a very quiet start, but all of a sudden props up to become the biggest character / player of the season. And I think that could be where Jordy is going. Now that he has gotten the credit for the Sandra boot, obviously this moment that the show propped up as the best episode in the history of the show. Again, for Jordy to be getting the credit for the Sandra boot is, again, them leading into this big player element of his edit. Obviously in this last week, we got so much of this Mark Jordy storyline, with Jordy seeing Mark getting the clue and then eventually having Mark tell him about the idol. And I think that is all pretty solid for Jordy. And then we also got him narrating the entire rest of the episode in terms of the KJ or Mel boot. where he gets so much content there and talking about the difference between the two, which again, like, it does very much feel like they are starting to prop him up as a big player. And I would not be surprised if this does not stop moving forward. Again, like, we did get this setup of Jordy potentially being Mark's downside. Now, obviously, that's something that we will talk about moving forward, but that is a semblance of a storyline now of Jordy being integral to that blind side if it were to happen, which again, I will not be surprised if moving forward he gets this really strong portrayal as this big player across the season. It's just, again, I don't think he's going to win. Now, again, like, between him and Jesse, I do feel like Jordy is getting more unnecessary content. Again, like, Jesse is really just getting content when it's necessary. Jordy is having content a bit more spread out. Like, he does have this Mark potential rivalry set up, and also has him talking about how he's the Joker and that sort of stuff that could potentially play a factor moving forward. Again, he at least got content in the premiere, even though it wasn't as personalized as I think it could have been. But, like, really, again, Jordy and Jesse for me are very close. And I do think the recent additions of certain storylines that he could be a part of moving forward do bump him above Jesse. But again, at the end of the day, I don't think either of them are winning. But he is here at number 5. Now number 4, and now we're getting into the people that I think can actually win. Again, literally the entire list before this, I don't think they're winning the game. At number 4, I think this person has a semblance of a chance, but even this person's not particularly likely. At number 4, we do have KJ. And KJ is someone that before this week would have been towards the bottom. Like, I had KJ pretty lowly ranked for a lot of the season, but I do think this was a very solid week for her. Kind of jumping on a thing similar to Jordy is that, again, she got content in the premiere. She got content there, but then, like, afterwards, she is invisible outside the points where Sophie gets involved in her storyline. Again, she gets 12 confessionals the episode that Sophie joins her tribe initially, despite having nothing since the premiere up until that point. And again, after that, gets nothing again until the eventual actual Sophie boot. So again, that is very circumstantial content, and that is a lot of the reason why she was so lowly ranked. But then, since Sophie's been gone, she's been getting consistent content. Like, she's on the show consistently. And I feel like these last couple episodes in particular have been pretty strong episodes for her. Again, showing her relationship with the guys, showing her being successful in integrating herself within them to the point where they vote out Mel over her. Like, I really feel like these last few episodes have been solid enough for her, where she has gone 5 episodes now in a row of having a decent amount of content. And again, while the beginning of her season was very wonky to me, I can at least see a semblance of a winner edit there for her, with her now coming out of Sophie's shadow after the Sophie boot. That being said, again, I don't think KJ is winning personally. Again, I think the beginning of her season is pretty weak, especially from a recent Australian Survivor winner. Again, I do think the editing style of the show definitely changed after Champions versus Contenders, where the winner of the recent seasons have gotten a lot of content around them being strong players earlier on in the season, while KJ really hasn't had that until a bit more recently. And again, I think it could play into this storyline of her coming out of Sophie's shadow, but realistically, I just feel like the winner of the season is going to get more consistent game content earlier on than KJ has gotten. So because that leaves her here at number 4. Now number 3, we're moving on to someone that is obviously a massive character for the season. I mean, out of the people left in the game, she does have the most confessionals by quite a bit, actually. And I do think she has storylines moving forward. I have her as a winner contender here for me, and that person is Chrissy. Now, in actuality, do I think Chrissy is going to win? Probably not. But I think she is obviously the more realistic option to win out of the people we've talked about so far. Again, like, to me, she obviously had a very strong week 1. I mean, she gets the most confessionals after week 1, despite the fact that she's on a cast with Sandra, who obviously Australian Survivor really wanted to prop up, and had other people like Akon, had Mark and Sam, had even her loved one in Croc, all of which not getting as much content as Chrissy, with her instantly coming off as a pretty likable figure on the show. And after week 1, she has a really big cool off in week 2, which can be a mixed bag. I mean, we did see Haley have a similar thing in last season, but really that wasn't really a thing for people like a David or a Pia. But again, it's fine. But again, like, really, I feel like her edit has skyrocketed again in the last few episodes. Again, with the Croc boot, I do think her storyline of wanting to win it for Croc and wanting to get revenge for Croc and be a major storyline moving forward. Now, do I suspect it to be? I'll be honest, not really. Again, I do think that storyline kind of ends with the Ben boot, where, yes, she does mention, oh, Sam and Jesse voted out my loved one, but I didn't really feel like much gravitas was being added to that element of the story, with more of the story being based around her wanting to get revenge on Ben. So that makes me think that, again, I don't think she'll come out on top here, but again, at least she has a storyline. But for me, again, at the end of the day, it's like there are two very clear front runners, and to be honest, it's not really close to me. And really, at the end of the day, also, I just feel like Chrissy's being propped up more so as a big character and a big personality than she is an eventual winner of the show. Again, to me, she's just probably the biggest character on the season and probably the most likable figure on the season, especially universally, to the point where I feel like, again, she was just the easiest person to promote outside of the returning players. I feel like that's a lot of the reason why she's getting as much content as she is and as much promotion as she is. But again, I just don't actually think she's going to win the game. So she's here at number 3. Now, number 2. And again, top 2, very obvious for me. I mean, if you can't tell, it's Mark or Sam. Like, I think one of these two people are winning the game. It feels like they are the stars of this season. They are the focal point of this season's storyline. We get so much content based around them making the merge together and running the game from that point forward, to where I am fully expecting that to be the case. The question is, who's at 1 and who's at 2? And to be honest, this week did shift a lot of my opinions to where the gap between the two is a lot closer, to where I had a certain person very clearly number 1 for the longest time, and I feel like this last week was a bad week for that person as a whole. However, I'm going to stick to my guns here. At number 2, I do have Sam. And again, like, I think Sam has gotten a very strong edit so far, and it's probably the edit that has the least amount of glaring holes in it. As, again, we will talk about Mark, but this last week was not the greatest week for Mark. And I feel like there are a lot of potential storylines that could lead to Mark being a boot relatively soon, where Sam doesn't have that. However, I also feel like Sam isn't really getting as much consistent content about winning this season. Like, I think she is getting a lot of content talking about Mark and wanting to go to the merge with Mark and play with Mark moving forward, but isn't getting much content about winning. Now, I will say that Sam is actually the most consistently edited person left on the season. She has gotten a confessional in all but 1 episode across the entire season. Obviously had major storylines early on, particularly around her and Sophie. She now has this relationship with Jesse, to where they're essentially playing the middle and have really been running their tribes up until this point. But that's kind of part of the reason that knocks her down from winner contention to me, is the fact that she is so consistently shown, but it feels like it's necessary. Like, it feels like she's being shown because she has to be shown, because she is the person actually running these tribes, because she is the person that is the deciding factor on a lot of these votes. Now, again, great on her from a gameplay standpoint. I think she is playing the best game out there based on the actual events of the season. But I think when we take the edit into consideration, it does make her edit feel a lot less special, especially when we factor into premiere as well, where, again, I talked about before, the premiere is usually a very important episode in determining the winner. And Sam didn't get much to do in the premiere. Really, all of her content was based around Mark, with her not getting a proper intro until episode 2, which, again, is abnormal for a winner of Australian Survivor. Now, I will say that I do expect Sam to make a deeper run on this season. Again, I don't expect her to be a boot anytime immediately, and I do fully expect one of Mark or Sam to win this game, with me leaning towards the other person. But I think there is serious potential that if that other person doesn't win, that all of the goodwill of their edit gets put onto Sam, and with her also having a very consistent edit up until this point, I think Sam is very clearly a top contender, so she is here at number 2. And with that, we're at number 1, and let's just get into it. Again, at number 1, I have Mark. And again, I've been saying this since the premiere. I mean, looking at my power rankings after every episode, Mark has been number 1 for every episode except for episode 2, where he was at number 2. Like, I've been very confident at a Mark win throughout this season. I literally started my first stream after the first week of Australian Survivor saying, we're really doing this again? Because Mark's premiere week edit was so similar to Haley's, and it just felt like them literally going back to the well and doing the exact same thing again, particularly the premiere. I think the premiere was pretty much by the numbers, your typical Australian Survivor winner edit. He obviously has this ingrained storyline with Sam and the fact that they are returning to the game after having initially met the last time. But through that, again, Mark is the one to get all the content out of that duo, where Sam is relegated to episode 2 instead of Mark. Obviously, we get the storyline of them wanting to meet back up at the merge and run the game from that point forward. Again, something I am expecting to happen coming into this merge. But even more egregious to me in terms of his edit is the fact that he literally gets a confessional very similar to Haley's from the premiere of last season, where Haley went through her tribe, talking about the dynamics of the people on the tribe and her opinions on them. Mark literally got the exact same thing. He literally went from person to person, talking about each person on the tribe, getting to detail his thoughts on them. Also, along with that, we get to see the foundation of his relationships with people like Jordy and Nina, and see him as a person that works alongside Nina in order to blindside Andy, with him getting credit for that Andy vote. We also have his relationship with Khan that gets set up by the end of week 1. That seems to be one that is going to be important moving forward. After the swap, we get a bit of a question mark in the sense that he does get to choose which tribe he goes on, and he does pick the tribe without Sam, which initially comes off negatively, but interestingly, the edit turns to the point where, again, initially we see Sam be upset that Mark didn't pick to go with her, but then we eventually get this long confessional from Sam where she rationalizes it, where she talks about how it was actually the better move because this way they don't put the target on themselves. So like, even though that scene initially come off negative, it does eventually turn to being positive for Mark, and it showing that Mark was right in that situation. Now, I will say that again, I think this last week was a bad week for Mark as a whole. While we do see him find an idol and still seems to be pretty close to Jordy, despite the fact that Jordy caught him, we do get confessionals that do undercut him. Again, he does have confessionals of Mark saying that no one knows that he has the clue, only to cut to Jordy talking about how he knows he has the clue. We have a confessional of Mark saying that he can trust Jordy, only for the edit to make it very clear that he can't trust Jordy. We also have Mark telling Jordy about his idol, only for Jordy to immediately say afterwards, "What an idiot." And again, these are massive knocks against Mark. And if it had not been for his really strong edit through the first half of the pre-merge, I would significantly knock Mark down at this point, especially because we also did get content not too long ago about how Mark is a potential target coming to the merge, where Shay talks about that in particular. And because of those reasons, me having Mark at number 1 here is not nearly as solid as what it would have been a week ago. It's not nearly as solid as what it was with Haley last season, where I felt like Haley was by far number 1. But I still do think Mark is winning this game. Again, there are just so many positives along the way that scream out as an Australian Survivor winner at it. Again, Australian Survivor, a show that I don't think has the ability to be subtle in their storytelling, nor do I think they care to be subtle in their storytelling, where I think they're, again, going to reuse the same formula for winners at it over and over and over again. Where, again, he had such a strong premiere, with him having literally all the check marks for a perfect winner edit after that premiere, him getting to outline his thoughts on his entire tribe, him getting set up storylines come into the merge around his relationship with Sam, him having one-on-one relationships being shown on the show, him also getting credit for the eventual boot of that episode. And again, along the way, he's gotten similar sort of content. Even in this last episode, even though it's been a bad week for him, they for some reason decide to make him seem to be the swing vote, where we get this content about how he just randomly says in the middle of the episode that, "Oh, I could just flip along with Shay to vote out KJ." And that seemed to have no relevance on the actual vote out, as obviously we don't see it happen. But it seems weird that they would even bother to set him up as a swing vote here unless they're trying to give him credit for this vote, which again, why are they giving him credit for this vote? Unless they're trying to prop him up for some reason. And considering his really strong content earlier on, despite the bad last week and, to be honest, kind of mediocre previous week as well, I am going to have Mark here at number 1, though again, I will say that again, if he is booted in this next week, which I think is probably his biggest danger spot across the entire season, I think at that point his winner edit would probably shift over to Sam. But for now, I'm sticking to my guns. Again, I said this after the premiere, I'll say it now. I do have Mark here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Australian Survivor, Blood versus Water. Now, moving forward in the season, obviously, I will be doing a review of the season once it is done, followed by a player ranking every player based on how they played on the season. Also, we do have more shows coming up here. Again, Survivor 42 starts very soon. BB Can 10. By the time this comes out, Celebrity Bear 3 already would have ended. And again, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Stay tuned on videos for those things as well. And also the typical type of content that you can expect from the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.